Thanks so much. That is all true. I'd forgotten about that bio. This is amazing. First of all, thanks everybody for coming out. I've got a little friend section over here that's gonna probably heckle me throughout, but mostly the people I don't know getting here at 9 o'clock in the morning, even with the amazing coffee and pastry. This is a great opportunity for me to come and talk about the fact that I actually don't get out much, is what my idea of perspective is. I've never made it to one of these Creative Mornings things, and that's part of the theme here for me. Getting up early and getting somewhere is new to me through the teaching and that sort of thing. So what Rose said is all true. I've illustrated more than 70 children's books. I've written about 20, 25 of them. And I'll just get started. Basically, this is all the new. First, also, I want to say thanks to Creative Mornings and thanks to this amazing space. This screen, when I walked in, I just wanted to give a little credit to the screen. I was worried about the sunlight, and this is amazing. I mean, I do a lot of showing things with a projector, and it's always horrible. I thought I'd start at the very beginning. I drew this picture in 1976, I think. I'm someone that if you had asked me in 1976, hey kid, hey young 8-year-old Brian, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said, I want to draw dinosaurs. And I drew a lot of dinosaurs back then. And then probably I would have said I want to draw bicycles. And I probably would have said I want to draw cars and trucks. And I drew cars and trucks and bicycles and dinosaurs. And later on, I would have said I want to draw Star Wars. And then it would have been I want to draw Dungeons and Dragons. And then it would have been I want to draw Duran Duran album covers. And that got me into graphic design school. And the career went from there. And so now I still draw dinosaurs. I still draw bicycles. I haven't done Duran Duran album covers yet, but I still draw cars and trucks and vehicles. This is the best this picture has ever looked on that screen. I'm gonna just keep talking about this screen. So for the last 20 years or so, I've been writing and drawing, children's books. And that's all great. I have no problem with it. But it kind of led me into a little bit of a box that I'll be talking about. When they asked me to speak, it was just a week and a half ago that Keenan, who's on the board, asked me to do this. And I said, well, is there a theme I need to follow? He says, well, you can do anything. You could talk about bicycling. You could talk about travel. I said, no one is coming at 8:30 in the morning to an illustrator's talk to see pictures of bicycles. He said, well, the theme is perspective. And I thought about the word perspective, and I said, I know what I'm going to do with this. So I did the first thing that anybody in this spot would do, was to actually find the definition of perspective. So perspective is the art of drawing, there's two definitions actually, the art of drawing solid objects on a two-dimensional surface so as to give the right impression of their height, I didn't write this is a dictionary, with depth and position in relation to each other, so blah, blah, blah. Basically it's this. If anybody in here, I'm sure there's a few people who went to art school or engineering, architecture, photography, you know what perspective is. It's looking down Broad Street and seeing, City Hall. It's kind of the way we portray depth. If you go to the art museum, you'll see the old medieval paintings. They just stack things on top of each other. Depth is implied in different ways. And then sometime in the Renaissance, the Italians figured out how to do this with horizon lines and vanishing points and show depth and that sort of thing. And what you'll see in the next few minutes, I don't have any use for this really in my work. The second definition of perspective is at the bottom here, a particular attitude toward or way of regarding something, a point of view. So there's two definitions to play with there, and I'm mostly interested right now in the second one, which is something along the lines of the way you see things and then maybe thinking about a different way to see things. And it's where I've been in my journey for the last several years, and I guess that's kind of what I'm going to try to talk about a little bit. So talking about the first version of perspective, like I said, I don't have any use for it. This is from a book called Everything Goes. I wrote it and drew it in about 2011, 2012. It was the first big splash of mine as a writer and an illustrator. And as you can see, when I think of a city, I'm thinking at it kind of more of a chaotic point of view. I look up Broad Street and I see the perspective and I see City Hall, but I'm more interested in the way the haphazard or cacophonic way cities are constructed and just kind of splatted on top of each other over the years. This is from another book called Tinyville Town. And so there's no vanishing point. There's no horizon. I don't really care about that sort of thing. This is a more recent illustration that very much shows the lack of interest I have in perspective. But this illustration is kind of the key to what I'm discussing here, which has more to do with the second point of view. And it's sort of the nexus of where I've been working lately, and it represents a whole lot to me. And that's what I'm going to get at today. Children's books haven't always been, well, actually children in general haven't really been on my radar my whole life. Most of us in our 20s, when we don't have kids, they're not. But even through work, I was writing and drawing graphic novels in the 1990s mostly. I went to school at Parsons, got a graphic design degree, wanted to be an art director, moved to Paris for a few years. And in Paris, I drew this, I was 22 years old, and I drew this book on the right called Frederick and Eloise. And later on, a few years later in San Francisco, I drew and wrote the one on the left called Dear Julia. And these are some scenes from that. As you can see back then, perspective in that first definition was very important to me. These two books were really based around looking up and looking down. And I use perspective a lot. But mostly these works were for grown-ups. They're not for kids at all. Like I said, children were not on my radar. I was doing work for, I worked for Adobe Systems, I worked for Oracle, living in San Francisco, little advertising agencies. I was a software jockey, so I was one of the few people that knew After Effects. And I would go into something like the Gap headquarters or to an advertising agency and sat down at a cubicle for a week and make little things move for these new things called websites and CD-ROMs. You guys remember all that stuff. And so it was a joy for me to be freelancing and making these little projects and learning the software. In the meantime, I was writing Dear Julia and drawing illustrations. So around 1999, suddenly I had a kid. And in 2000, I had another kid, moved to Philadelphia, and I find myself in the basement of the Central Library over on Ben Franklin Parkway. And any of you guys who have little kids, you know that you sit there in that Central Library and you're watching these toddlers run around, you're sitting there staring at children's books for the first time in 30 years for me. And I realized that I loved telling stories. I think that's where these books come from, is a love for telling stories, drawing pictures, and in comic books in general. And so as I'm sitting there in the library and I'm letting my kids charge around and trying to find ways to entertain them, these kids, by the way, now are 25 and 23 years old, so this feels like a million years ago to me. There were two kinds of children's books that I was reading. There were the kinds like, say, Where the Wild Things Are, that were so inspiring to me, and I would think, I want to do that. And then there were kind, and I won't name names, but they were the ones that I would read and say, I can do that, So it's kind of two kinds of inspiration there. And that was 2001, 2002, I suppose. And within 2 years, my first book that I illustrated came out. I threw the kids in the Subaru, drove out to Chemical Road, Barnes & Noble, and we had a little party in the children's section of Barnes & Noble seeing my first book that I illustrated sitting there on the shelves. So I was teaching at University of the Arts back then. I was a full-time professor or assistant professor of illustration. And when I left that in 2006, I worked in a studio with another illustrator on Spring Garden. And the main point of that is my world was very collaborative. I got out a lot. I was making this new career for me work. I was going to school visits all the time. In fact, with school visits in mind, that's mainly the kind of public speaking that I do. And when I was thinking about talking to you guys and feeling a little anxious about it over the last few days, the old saying, they say, look at your audience and just think of them in their underwear. That'll calm you down. And for me, it's more like looking at you guys and thinking of you as hyperactive 5-year-olds. And that's kind of what gets me through this. So little kids are easy to talk to. They just kind of roll around on the floor and they want to see pretty pictures. I kind of knew I had to get something a little more put together for this. But I would do a lot of school visits. I was talking to people. I was working with editors and working with my agent. And everything felt very group-oriented and collaborative. And then around 2009, I got a studio in Roxborough. And that's a little drawing I did the other day of my studio. I've been there 15 years now, and I'd never drawn a picture of it. And it was a great time. That Everything Goes book with the cars and trucks came in. It was a big project. I was doing some screen printing, a lot of bicycling. I'd taken up bicycling, a lot of social life there. But basically just through work, I was talking to people. I was communicating and I was collaborating, and it felt good. There were stresses, though, that were starting to appear that now I look back and I reflect on and I see what was happening, and I became this guy. I was taking every single thing that came along. My kids were the most important thing. I was working on, and what I did is I kind of just creatively shut the door. And so even though I had all the work in the world, I was doing a ton of work. You can, in fact, thinking about the word perspective, you can look at this drawing two different ways. One is, hey, that guy looks busy. So he's sitting there, he's drawing pictures, and that's what I did 8 hours a day. I would walk into my studio, and I would shut the door, and I would draw my pictures. I didn't like it when people came to visit. I just wanted to just leave me alone and let me draw. And that was kind of the whole general take on the way I felt. It was good at the time, and you would think it was healthy in a way because I could shut the door at 5 o'clock or so, go home and help my kids with their homework, hang out with my wife, cook dinner, watch, The Wire or something, and everything was fine. And it seems healthy externally, but creatively, something was not quite working. The books were good, but again, I didn't recognize it. At the time, I thought everything was perfect. So we were really set, though, because I was basically social distance, right? So I was working in my studio alone. My wife is a communications consultant, was working at home alone. The kids got to the point, they were teenagers, they're about to move out, and then we know what happened. Everything changed in 2020. But we were set up for it, So Sasha, our world didn't change much. We were socially distanced professionally. We were socially distanced. We were perfectly happy just, going home and watching, Modern Family reruns and drinking cocktails until midnight. And that's, luckily we were also, we didn't have any health issues. My kids were in college or moving out. They had graduated high school, so we weren't having to worry about virtual school. I thank God every day for that. Any parent who had to deal with that, he did a great thing. I didn't have to worry about it. But my kids were moving out. We were socially distanced, and we thought we were doing fine. And probably the best thing that came out of this was when publishing ground to a halt. Children's publishing just stopped, and I guess maybe all publishing did. I suspect this place emptied out as well, right? Nobody was going to work. We already knew how to work from home. We didn't have to relearn how to do the work distanced, away from a group. And the entire country and the entire world was figuring this out at the same time. And we felt like we had an advantage. One good thing that came out of it is because publishing ground to a halt, it allowed me to take an extra year on this book I was working on called My Hero. And what I did is, as a writer, I leaned into it. This book is about a dad who doesn't believe that his daughter is really a superhero, and she believes she is. And I found ways in this story to make it really more about the relationship I had with my own kid, and who at the time was 19 or 20, I guess. But just thinking about who this kid was becoming and how he was growing up. And I made that what the book was about in a way as a writer. But more importantly for me creatively as an illustrator, I was able to do the entire book with actual art supplies. And I hadn't done that since those graphic novels back in the 90s. Everything had been done with Photoshop and scanning and that sort of thing. So I actually bought a lot of pencils, a lot of paints, and I taught myself how to draw on paper again and get things scanned. And so the entire book was done very traditionally. One weird thing about publishing, and maybe children's publishing in particular, is like the book I'm working on right now won't be out for about 14 or 15 months, even if I finished it today. There's a long, weird wait between writing a story, then illustrating the story, and then seeing it in the world. So as much as my heart and soul I'd put into this book, I finished, I guess, the summer of 2021, and it was almost a little more than a year later that the book came out. And everything I had no other work. There was nothing else to do. It was just thinking about this book coming out. And before I had gone visiting school visits, I had visited bookstores promoting books. When this book came out in May of 2022, none of that existed. School visits weren't happening. Bookstores still weren't having guests come to visit. Nobody was doing public speaking like this. And the book landed with a collective yawn which broke my heart. And it made it really kind of put me in a box. I drew it very literally. I felt like I was in a box. I had all my eggs in that one basket of that book, and I knew something needed to change. The stresses were there. I was losing my mind. When the one thing I thought I was going to get out, the rest of the world was going back to work. Everybody was heading to their offices, going back to school. Sasha and I were sitting at home, and her work had continued. She does a lot of creative consulting for nonprofits, and the work had stayed on, so she's doing her Zoom calls every day. And I think, I remember just, I took up woodworking. It was just hobby time, and it became very difficult for me, so I knew something needed to change. But moreover, I was losing interest in work for kids. And I think children's publishing changed in some ways where it's the mechanics of the way children's publishing works, but also just the expectations they had. Everything started needing to be very cute and very, we are all the same, or we are all different, and everybody's really happy. And it's just fine, but my head wasn't there. My head was dark. I was bicycling around Lower Merion and seeing the inspiration for these drawings, which was police tape around playgrounds, schools boarded up, grocery stores were closed during the pandemic. And I began drawing these really strange little drawings of like boarded up communities and buildings with machinery attached. And it's just kind of the way, it's the first work I'd done in years that didn't have a client involved in it. It was just for me. And every day I sat at the dining room table and I drew 3 or 4 of these drawings, and my head was in a weird place at the time. And basically what was happening was I was starting to think about how I was just mad at everything. So the new Photoshop would come out, and I'd be like, oh man, they changed everything. I wanted Photoshop to be like it was in 1995. The new iPhone iOS update. No, I didn't want my phone to do that. I don't need it, and I was that guy. I was out, just shouting my cane at the sky. So basically you could say I was losing perspective. But again, I was still going to my same studio every day and doing the same thing. And so I started wondering, do I have anything to offer as an illustrator? I've been doing this 25 years. I didn't, I use Instagram. I'd never seen TikTok. I didn't know how to find the work I wanted to do. I wanted to do work for grown-ups. I wanted to talk to you again. I didn't want to talk to 5-year-olds. My kids were dark 24-year-olds. It just wasn't interesting to me to come off of that book that didn't do well and start thinking about cute things I could say to kids again. It wasn't in my place, in my head at all. So I did what anyone does. I became a teacher. 2 days a week, what happened? I just sent an email and said, hey, do you guys have any use for someone like me? And it turns out that my books were actually taught in some of the children's book classes at Tyler. All the faculty knew the work that I do, and so they real quickly said, yes, come and teach. So I taught a senior illustration class the first semester. Now in my third semester there, I'm teaching junior illustration. And if you've taught, it's a strange thing to try to figure out how to tell someone how to do what you do. Like if you make pancakes, you can show your kid or a friend, here's how you make pancakes. But I'd spent so long just sitting in my studio making this stuff. I actually was about to walk into class and realize I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know how to tell someone to enjoy this is a career that they're looking forward to doing. And here I was just pissed off at the world. I can't walk in there and go, it all sucks. They're gonna change Photoshop on you when you least expect it. I didn't want to use the iPad. I didn't want to use Procreate. I didn't want to do any of that. I just wanted to do work the way I wanted to do it. But in teaching, you can't do that. You kind of have to, I guess I'll use it again, change your perspective, change your point of view, and find new ways to say to people. I'll never forget the first day I was on the train platform. I don't take the train much, or I do now, but at the time, maybe in 25 years of being in Philly, I'd taken a train 3 or 4 times. I didn't even know where the Banning-Up train platform was. I walked down the hill from Roxborough. This is the first picture, was up there on the top left. My first day of teaching at Tyler that morning, the sun was coming up. It was a miracle. I'm not religious, but God was talking to me. He's like, you're gonna come in and teach today. This is gonna be amazing. And the sun was coming up, and I took a photo and I sent it to my wife and I said, here we go. And I think I might've posted it on Instagram as well. And so every day, it's kind of a non sequitur, but every day I go to that train station and I take a picture. And it's not always from this point of view right now. Lately it's been, I go the other direction, show the crowd getting on the train as the train pulls up. But this was the collection of photos I took that semester. And it sort of, to me, represents, first of all, you've definitely got perspective there, right? That first definition of perspective. But it represents just kind of my new way of thinking about this. I had to just open up a little bit and learn some new things. One of the things I did is I discovered Skillshare. If you don't think you know how to teach, get up online and watch people teach. If I don't know how to show somebody how to do a thing in Photoshop, get online and watch someone show somebody how to do a thing in Photoshop. And I accidentally signed up for a whole year of Skillshare. And I'll tell you, I love it. I sit and I draw and I just watch somebody how to draw a logo. I go, I've been drawing logos for 30 years. I know how to do a logo. But seeing how someone else does it differently has been really brilliant for me. And again, that's the whole point of this. I wanted to find a way to do something differently. So I did what I was telling my students to do. One of the things that students have to do is they do a lot of work and they're not getting paid for it. So I started, while I was working on children's books, still working on children's books, started drawing pictures for myself, giving myself assignments as I was teaching my students things. I signed up for a class called Getting Paid to Draw. An illustrator in Atlanta teaches it online. And I wrote to him and I said, listen, Mike, you know I've been getting paid to draw for 30 years. What do I have to learn from you? Because, he's 12, 15 years younger than me. And he's like, listen, if you go a week into this and you're not getting anything out of it, I'll give you your money back. Same thing. It was brilliant. It gave me some accountability as a class where we all get online and talk about each other's work. And so I started drawing work for grown-ups again and giving myself little assignments. And so I'm not saying when I say draw for grown-ups, I don't mean serious. I mean, it's just stuff that kids wouldn't necessarily get. And I think a businessman with a duck on his head. It was in my head and it's on my portfolio now. Another one was I discovered booze was making its way into everything I was drawing. So, there's not just drawing pictures, it's finding concepts. So I'm thinking, okay, what market am I looking forward to working in? What do I want to do? And we would be seeing these wine labels. And the same thing with the children's books. I would see wine labels that I loved and think, I really want to make these wine labels, or beer labels, or more likely whiskey labels. And then I would see labels where I'm like, hell, I could do that. And so it had the same sense of when I was getting into children's books. And so, but I don't only draw booze. It's just kind of fun to talk about, right? So, we got really good at drinking cocktails over the pandemic. Why not draw them? So I started making wine labels for myself. These don't really exist. None of these wine labels here or whiskey labels exist. They're my own drawings. And I remember going into my class one day, trying to show my students how to wrap a JPEG or an image around a picture of a bottle. And I found a picture of a bottle online and was showing them how to use the tools and in Photoshop to do this. And one of them raises his hand. He says, Brian, do you know what a mock-up is? And I said, well, that's what I'm making here for you students. And he said, no, really, go to creativemarket.com or, Adobe Stock or whatever it is and download mock-ups. And that was like a miracle to me. This is less than a year ago now. A year ago, I didn't know how to do this. And if you know what I'm talking about, you click on a layer, it pulls up a smart object and you can put your image on there and it wraps it around and it shows the lighting and all this kind of thing. For me, I will never forget that. It's just like, I didn't know, and they just thought it was hysterical, but I think that also kind of warmed them to, who's this guy trying to teach us thing? I'm ready to learn as well. I thought that was just great. So I've been making a lot of these. They're on my portfolio now, and it hasn't led to work yet, but I don't have any problem. I feel more in control, not just thinking I'm going to throw things on Instagram and hope an art director sees it. It's really not like that. The second part of this looking for new work thing was that I realized I'd been here 25 years and I'm a Philadelphian. I was born in Little Rock. I grew up in Texas, went to school in New York, lived in Paris, 6 years in San Francisco. But I'll tell you what, when your team wins the Super Bowl and you're out on the street hugging neighbors at midnight and crying, that's when you realize, I live in Philadelphia now. And, today's opening day, my wife says, maybe you shouldn't wear the hat. I said, I got to wear the hat. Today's opening day. And I wish I was going to be at the ball game today. I love this city. It's drawn, my dad in Conway, Arkansas calls me this morning and I'm thinking, that's where I'm from, but this is where I am. So one of the things I did was I drew a Philly cheesesteak and I have some stickers. There may still be some over there. I made these into stickers. So I started leaning into being here and being part of this. And that's where that Inquirer piece comes in. Anton Klusner, the art director, called me or sent me an email about late January. And he says, we've got a piece and we need it quick. And we need to publish this thing in 2 weeks. It's It's for Valentine's Day. Philadelphia apparently is a city where singles live. And the whole idea was, you're single in Philadelphia, what do you do? And this, I think I might have, if you can hang up an email, but I quit reading the email and stood up and was like, I'm so in. I'd never done work for the Inquirer before. I mean, how else do you live in a city but do work for your local newspaper? It's like, it feels like a real thing. But more than that, he wanted me to bring in, he had a list of stuff. So we had, one of the examples was, having a drink at JG Sky High at the top of the Comcast building there. Another one was having a cup of coffee at Rally Coffee. My good friend Meredith owns Rally Coffee, so of course I highlighted that one and sent it to her, and I said, you're gonna get a shout out. So I got to do Rally Coffee over in South Philly. I did the Ritz Theater, and my little joke here was the movies playing at the Ritz are Castaway, The Lobster, and Eat, Pray, Love. All three movies about being alone. And so I even had to look up the little posters and draw those. But this was all drawn on the iPad in Procreate. So I learned a couple of things over the last year. And how about that animation? Procreate does that little animation thing, and it's pretty neat. And so then they also had DeBruno Brothers and Heyday and Boyd's. Boyd's actually retweeted or reposted the story or whatever it is of this. I had a Cupid holding a bow and arrow there, the little Cupid arrow, and the art director, Anton, said, let's make it Ben Franklin, because that's what's more Philly than Ben Franklin. And I was like, yeah, he's totally right. I got to make it Ben Franklin. So we went all in with making it Philly, and that just made me so happy. And so when the actual paper came out, I ride bikes a lot. I have a lot of friends I ride bikes with, and they always say, oh, my 4-year-old's reading your books. I'm like, great. Are you reading my books also? Probably not. I'm happy that their 4-year-old is into my books, believe me. But it was really great when then they would say, I got a lot of texts from friends. Hey man, I saw this today. This came out the Sunday before Valentine's Day. And it got a lot of play. It was my books are in Barnes's and Noble's, they're in bookstores, they're on Amazon. But it was really awesome to see friends holding up pictures of newspapers. This is actually me here, with my drawing on it, and to know that that's a city thing, it's a local thing, and it really represents, again, back to that perspective, everything that came together for me to kind of get out of my own head and start making work I wanted to make again. Now I'm still drawing children's books. These are 2 books that I made last year. The one on the left will be out in August, the one on the right will be out in September, and definitely they are cute. The pig one is 4 cute little pigs making a cute little road and going to a cute little carnival, and that was perfectly fine with me. Again, both of these books were done completely on my iPad, so I'm kind of gone hard into that way. This one here is kind of special. They asked me to write a book. I was asked to write a book making a parody of that song, On Top of Old Smoky, I'll Cover With Cheese, or On Top of Spaghetti, that's what it was. So we had to call it Linguini for copyright reasons. But this is a board book with an eyeball in the middle. It's a plastic eyeball. And I only knew about this project for about a year as the oncoming eyeball project, and neither my agent nor I knew what the hell it was gonna be. When it came along, it was like, this is great. So I went to my local diner and I wrote this song, On Top of Linguini, All Covered with Cheese. I lost my poor eyeball when Frankenstein sneezed. And the whole thing is a Halloween trip through town as they're chasing this bouncing eyeball on just 5 pages down the road. I can't wait for this book to come out. It's going to be so much fun. I know I'm going to sing it on an Instagram story at some point. Just yesterday, I completed a script for a book about a stink bug that I'm working on, and I'm going to be sending that out to my agent soon. And I've been drawing this stink bug for 2 years, and it finally came together. I started a newsletter. Who doesn't have a newsletter these days? I bet you all have newsletters. We're all on Substack. I'm loving it. In this particular issue that came out last week, I'm talking about the fact that I think I write children's books wrong and how to go about doing that. I actually reached out and I interviewed 7 or 8 of my colleagues to talk to them about how they write their own picture books and stuff. And I know, Kevin, I didn't interview you. I'm really sorry. I need to do that. That's all right, yeah. But editors, a couple of writers who do different things, and got some really good answers. And again, this is not something a year ago I would have done. I would have instead hidden my little studio and said, I know how to do this. I've illustrated 75 books. I know how to make picture books. But really, I wanted to find another way to do it, another way to make something work differently than I had done before. So that's where we end up here. And I'm not sure if this is a good ending or not, because I kind of see it, believe me, this is scripted. I kind of see it as a good beginning, but it depends on your perspective. So I kind of needed to wrap it up with that. And with that, I thank you all for your time. Coffee and scones in the back.
Take that.